Restaurant employees of Reddit. What actually happens when someone doesn't have enough to pay the bill? Most you've ever seen? Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to the Vancher channel. Also, please share your thoughts on this video in the comments. Let's get started. Story 1. I delivered for Domino's Pizza in the early 2000s. I took an order that went to an apartment complex on the edge of town. When I arrived, the front door was wide open. I knocked on the door and I heard a voice telling me to come in. I walked into the apartment and made my way to the living room. There was a man sitting on the ground. A wheelchair was on the other side of the room. I asked if he was okay, and he told me he had to sleep in the floor because he didn't have a bed. I looked around the apartment and noticed he had no furniture. He only had an overhead light and nothing else. I pulled his order out of the bag and told him the price. He then told me he had no money but hadn't eaten in a few days. I was new at the job and didn't know what the policy would be for something like this. I told him I couldn't give him his pizza and apologized over and over. He told me he understood and I left. When I got back to the store, I told the manager about what happened. He asked me if I wanted to give the guy the pizza. I told him I did, but I didn't want to get in trouble. He told me it was okay because he knew I believed the guy, and also because of the guy's living situation. The manager walked over to a computer and deleted the order. He then told me to grab a few cans of pop and some wings that were never picked up. He then told me we couldn't do this all the time, but there were times when it was the right thing to do, and I could make that decision the next time. I drove back over to the guy's house and knocked on the open door again. He told me to leave the door open because it helped keep the apartment cool. I was called into the apartment and saw the guy was still on the floor. He saw that I was still carrying his order and his face lit up. I told him I was bringing his food back along with some other things. He was so thankful. He told me this food would last him a week and asked me to put everything on the counter. The man then proceeded to thank me. I apologized and told him I wanted to help, but I didn't know if it was okay. We talked for a bit before I had to go back to work. The whole interaction made me sad. The guy was really nice but handed a shoot card in life. He never ordered from us again, and I have no idea what happened to him. I wish I had checked on him at least one more time, but I didn't, and I kind of regret it. Answer: FWIW, your manager is a great human being, and more of us need to be like him. You had an opportunity to get a first-hand experience on being kind in the service industry, and I hope you turned out great as well. I used to work customer service in video game with in-app purchases, and I had no problem hooking customers up if they're cool and not backfire on me. In regards to checking in on him, that's not your job, and you shouldn't carry that burden. Let's just assume his rich uncle passed away and left him a bunch of inheritance. He was able to hire a help and improve his situation. If you went to check in on him and he's in a much worse position, that's just going to haunt you. You did the best you can, and that's good enough, mate. Story 2. I realized I didn't have my wallet because I'd changed purses. I explained, apologized, and left my phone as collateral while I ran back to my apartment for my wallet. I then ran all the way back and, sweaty and gasping, found my waiter to pay. He felt bad that I was trying so hard to fix this and gave me a free drink. Answer: I didn't realize I hadn't brought my wallet and they didn't have Apple Cash. It was super embarrassing, but I asked someone nearby if they could cover my meal and I Venmo'd them back. They were super nice about it, about watching each other's backs and all. But when he went to swipe his card, the reader would not accept it. So we both kind of just looked back at each other with this blank face. Eventually it did go through though, haha. Story 3. A table shorted me 30, left me 120 in cash on a 150 tab. Went to the manager asking what to do. He told me I could pay the difference to make the check whole, or they'd mark the shortage as a walkout and I'd get written up. I asked what would have happened if they left me nothing and just walked out. Manager's response was, same two options. Since I wasn't going to pay the difference from my tips and was going to get written up anyway, I told him, my bad. They walked out on the E-Night tab. I'll take the write-up. Pocketed the 120 in cash and got written up. Answer: Chen Sheng was an officer serving the Qin dynasty, famous for their draconian punishments. He was supposed to lead his army to a rendezvous point, but he got delayed by heavy rains, and it became clear he was going to arrive late. The way I always hear the story told is this. Chen turns to his friend Wu Guang and asks, "What's the penalty for being late?" "Passing," says Wu. "And what's the penalty for rebellion?" "Passing," says Wu. "Well then," says Chen Sheng. And thus began the famous Dazixiang uprising, which caused thousands of deaths and helped usher in a period of instability and chaos that resulted in the fall of the Qin dynasty 3 years later. Story 4. We once had a family who racked up a $350 bill at a steakhouse, then realized they'd forgotten their wallet. The manager made one adult stay behind while the rest went to get it. They never came back. The guy sat there for 3 hours before admitting they ditched him too. Answer: I forgot my wallet at Morimoto's in Napa, was on a 4th or 5th date with my now wife, and made a good faith gesture to pay by calling Amex and asking if they could run my card without the card. I knew my card numbers. They didn't want to deal with that and just had us come back the next day. We tipped really well. Omakase was great, and a few years later when at Morimoto's on Maui, they even looked up what the menu was and made sure we had no repeats. I was sure to have my wallet that time. Story 5. I've seen a mean old tipsy pass out after eating. Waitress took out his wallet and paid the bill with his cash. Probably not legal. She later became manager. Answer: used to go to this bar all the time with a super cool bartender. One night a bunch of assholes got tipsy and were absolutely terrible to her. Not just rowdy drunks, but insulting and the whole nine. Those dumbasses signed the check but didn't put anything for tip on purpose, but were too stupid to cross out that area or write 0. We told her to walk away after they left and then gave her a very nice tip on their check from them for them. Story 6. In my experience, it depends on the situation. If someone ran out on a small check, we usually ended up doing nothing, but you'd be banned if you ever dared to show up again. Some customers would apologize and promise to come back and pay. We would generally just let them go, especially if they were a regular. More often than not, they did come back and pay. Even people who straight up refused to pay would generally just be banned. I remember my manager calling the police just once on someone trying to walk out after racking up a huge check and getting into a screaming argument with my manager when he tried to stop him. Answer: I was mortified when my debit card didn't work when I was like 18. I thought I'd be hauled off to jail. I swore I'd be back to pay. Went to the ATM. Debit still didn't work. I woke my mom up and begged her for money. All she had was a 100 she kept for emergencies. I ran back and dropped the 100 on what was a 20 check, left an 80 tip. For about a year after that, they always gave me free soft drinks and occasionally comped an appetizer or other free food. It was a Denny's back in the 1990s. Story 7. I used to deliver pizza in college. Never exactly saw this play out except one time. I showed up to the guy's house and he handed me a Ziploc bag full of change and said, "Sorry, this is all I have. It should be enough." I was not about to start counting it on his porch, so I gave him the pizzas. Went back to the restaurant and told my manager. He voided the sale and just put the change in the register. Answer: that reminds me of the time I was in college delivering pizzas. I pulled up to a hotel and these two guys came to the door with a handful of change. They were watching me as I opened my fanny pack with all my bills in it, and I thought they were thinking of robbing me, but I outweighed the two of them combined. I wonder how many pizzas they ordered, hoping for a short and skinny delivery person. Story 8. Bounce checks and dine and dashes were far more common than, "Whoops, I forgot my wallet." But it does happen. Usually the restaurant would just ask them to come back tomorrow and pay, and the patron would in fact come back the next day and pay. Answer: this happened to me at In-N-Out once. I went through the drive-thru and realized too late that I didn't have my wallet on me. I also didn't have Apple Pay enabled on my phone. I told the girl, "I'm so sorry, just cancel the order." The manager came up to the window and asked me if I lived in the area. I said yes, right up the road. She told me to come back with the money and let me go through with my order. I was back at In-N-Out within 15 minutes with the money. Story 9. I own a few restaurants, so it depends. If someone walks out on the bill and it's small, I just write it off and go on with my day. If it's big, we file a police report. Nothing's ever come of those reports as they're usually tourists from out of state anyways. And BTW making staff pay for it is both illegal and unethical. So we don't do that. A few times a customer has stated they can't pay, which has caused a bit of a negotiation. Once it was a clearly homeless man who just said he has no money, and that was it. Told him no biggie, he was just hungry, and off he went. Didn't see him again. Another was someone who rang up a whole tab drinking and decided to not give a shoot and flat out refused to pay. He looked more interested in starting a fight than getting out of his bill. The police came, and suddenly his wallet was out though. The most I've lost on a walkout was about 100. It's pretty rare in my area to have such problems. 90 of my problems are dealing with weirdos and crazies like the pretend health inspector we had come by. Also, side note, my bartender got swindled on a fake 100 one time. Was annoying, but I absorbed the cost and I retrained the staff on spotting them. Next day, the same guy shows up and says, did you guys get some funny money yesterday? I had a joke bill in my wallet and might have accidentally used it. So that was nice of him. Story 10. I used to be a server and had this table with 4 guys. Their bill came up to somewhere around 52 and some change. I brought them the bill, and when I went to collect it, the guys were gone and there was only 50 cash on the table. I told my manager, and he removed something from their bill and cashed it out so I would still get something for a tip. It was definitely a shoot thing for those guys to do, but thankfully I had a good manager that made sure it wouldn't come out of my pocket. Answer. Used to deliver pizzas and delivered to another restaurant. The guy who handed me the money, he counted it out in front of me and then handed it over. I should have recounted before I left because he must have snuck a bill back and left me 20 short. Went back to mine and realized what happened. The manager attempted to call, but they refused to answer the phone. He ended up adjusting the price as well. Not a great tip out of it, but at least it was something. Story 11. My family and I accidentally walked out on luck one time after eating at a restaurant we had been to several times before. It was a smaller family-type place, and my mom realized we hadn't paid while we were still out later that day. We rushed there, and apparently the woman who worked the register was very confident we would be back, while someone who worked in the back was worried we wouldn't. We did indeed go back and pay. LOL. No harm, no foul. We all laughed about it. Story 12. One time I was at a local Chinese restaurant with my 10-year-old son. To my horror, my wallet was not in my purse. I did not have 1 cent or a credit card on me. They let me go home for my money, but they made me leave my son there as collateral. Answer. My mom did the same with me at a Cracker Barrel. I'm lucky they have the little store attached, so I had something to do. Although I always wonder what the conversation at the register was when the manager told the employees that there would be an unattended 10-year-old in the store to keep an eye on. When I got older, I also wondered why she didn't just leave her purse instead. LOL. No shade. Our families are cut from the same cloth. Story 13. This happened with my dad. He was ordering food at a drive-thru in a storm, and the electricity shut off as a transformer got hit by lightning. Dad waited in the drive-thru for a few minutes as the manager told him the generator usually kicks on and he can pay with card. Well, generator was busted and my dad had no cash. Manager was nice enough to give him the food no charge, but my dad was insistent he pay for it. Manager told him it's okay, and it was just an act of God occurrence. Well, this didn't stop my dad. He drove next door to a grocery store, took cash out, and drove back with the cash in hand. 20 order turned into 40 for the drive-thru workers as a tip. He became a priority customer after that one. Story 14. I was a customer once. Went out to eat and definitely thought I had enough for the bill and a decent tip. I didn't, and I was all cash back then. No card to fall back on. I was horrified. Told the server I was short. She was so nice. Said I didn't have to tip. I was like, I don't even have enough for the bill. She was still cool. I said I'd be right back. Not sure she believed me, but I went home and grabbed the emergency cash and went right back. Settled up and gave her a great tip. She ribbed me a few times when I went back, but it was all in fun. And Story 15. At a local spot, they put your name on a big whiteboard next to the bar, first and last, as well as amount owed until you settle your bill. Answer. Years ago, my grandpa died and mom was given control of his bank account. She wrote a check to fix his truck, forgot, and closed the account. For years, her face was up on their wall of shame for skipping out on the bill, and she had no idea until she came in again and saw it. She was so embarrassed. LOL. She told them what happened and paid the bill, and they were cool with it and took her picture down. Story 16. I've only had this happen maybe 3 times in my 25 years in the industry. 2 were regulars, and they made it good later and made sure to leave extra for the servers. The other was banned because he was a shoot jerk, busted ne'er-do-well, and he was no longer welcomed in one of the last bars in town that would offer him service. I miss the days when local bar restaurants had a good relationship with each other, and we could call and ask about a certain patron, and either the manager or bartender would be the first person to tell you if they were a shit stain. Or they'd call ahead and warn you that this fudge was on the way to your place and we just wouldn't serve them. Answer. I've never worked in a bar, but last year I witnessed something similar to your last paragraph, with bars calling other bars about customers, but in a good way. LOL. Was in a small town for a wedding, And once the party was over, a bunch of us walked into town hoping to go to the one well-rated bar we found. Place was too packed, so they pointed us to some more dive bar a few blocks away. By the time we got there, apparently someone at the first bar had called this bar and told them a well-dressed wedding party was on the way. So they were already super welcoming and ready for us once we got there, LOL. Story 17. I'm not a restaurant employee, but I can tell you what happened to me at a Longhorn. Their machine declined my bank card, so I told the waitress I was going across the street to get cash from the ATM. My wife never left the table. The manager came out and informed my wife that the cops had been called and they were trespassing her from the property. So she got up and walked outside at their insistence. I got back at the same time the cops showed up. Explained to the cops what happened. The waitress was horrified by the manager's response. I was asked to never return and didn't pay a dime. Complained to Longhorn Corporate and they sent me twice my bill and gift cards with an apology note. I have never been back. Story 18. When I was a fast food manager, if your card declined or you actually told us you forgot your money, and if your order was less than 8, I would comp the meal and ask that they call the survey line for the store instead. Pretty against the hotline policy, not supposed to bribe. But you literally didn't have to, and I had no way of knowing if you did or not. Just a way to build positive relationships with the customers and help the store numbers. Story 19. I work at a local pizza place. And one time a woman came in with a card we didn't take. She ran out to her car, but she didn't have another form of payment. My manager just gave it to her since it only cost $10. She actually came in a few months later again, this time having a form of payment we take, and she actually paid for it. Was pretty cool. Story 20. I wasn't the restaurant employee in this situation, but during college, I worked 2 jobs and lived with my parents. On their wedding anniversary, I wanted to surprise them with their favorite meals from a local restaurant. My dad loved seafood, so I ordered him a lobster tail dinner that was listed at market price. I've never ordered lobster before and I didn't know what market price meant. I went to the restaurant to pick it up, but I didn't have enough money to pay for it. I didn't know what to do, so I offered the hostess all of my money, which was around $40. She didn't know what to do either, and she went in the back to get the manager. I was a nervous wreck and started crying. The manager came out and I explained to him what happened. He ended up taking my money and letting me keep the food. I felt horrible after. I was such an idiot. Story 21. My wife and I went out to Red Lobster about 15 years ago when it was still pretty decent. When the waiter brought our bill, I realized I didn't have my wallet on me. At the time, my wife didn't carry her money if I was with her, and it was before you could pay with a phone. I apologized and my wife went home to get our money. Roughly 30 to 40 minute drive round trip. It just so happens that this was endless shrimp season. The waiter kept bringing shrimp out about every 5 minutes, and even though I told him not to, he kept delivering. I was so stuffed, but I didn't want to waste it. He got a big tip. To this day, that was the best service I ever received in a restaurant. Story 22. Went to a food cart. They didn't take cards. We said, "Sorry, we'll be back another time. You paid when you ordered." The guy was like, "No problem," and insisted we take the food. Went to an ATM and went straight back. Gave him double the cost of the food and said, "Thanks so much. Great food and incredible customer service." Story 23. The manager comes out and tries to work something out. They will try and get you to call someone who can give payment over the phone. If you can't do that, they'll try and hold something collateral like your ID to get you to come in tomorrow and pay. I've never seen them call the cops, and having you wash dishes is all Hollywood. Besides it taking too long to train you, it's in violation of a million labor laws and OSHA laws. If they truly cannot get a payment, they comp the meal and ban you from returning. My expertise is a low-mid casual dining. No idea what happens at high-end establishments. Answer. I was a waiter years ago. Dude had a $25 bill and said he only had $20. I offered to get the manager to see if he would work something out. Manager comes out and the customer just lays into me. I was slow getting his order. He waited an hour for his food. It was the wrong food. I was rude about the bill. I overcharged him. Manager comped his meal and also told me I would only be getting shoot shifts for a month. The dude left a $100 bill as a tip on his comped bill. To this day, I have no fudge clue what that dude's deal was. Story 24. The hilarity of a car ad showing up under this with the tagline, "Outrun anything." Anyway, yeah, the places I've worked were counter service and pay up front, so you just wouldn't get your food. Makes it easy. Story 25. When I was a teenager, I worked at a sandwich shop that was cash only. We were across the street from a bank, so the few times customers were short, they'd usually run to the bank and come back with cash. I only had one customer that told me they'd come back with cash and didn't. This person happened to be an instructor at a film camp that I was a part of. I thought I knew her pretty well and was shocked that she didn't return with cash. At the end of my shift, I had to explain why the till was short. Not a great moment for me. Story 26. When I was a kid, I would buy Game Pro magazine every month at the corner store in the morning on the way to school. I would always bring exact change. One month they increased the price and I didn't notice. I was short 25 cents at checkout. The cashier let me take the magazine and told me I could come back later with the rest of the money. I went back with the 25 cents that day immediately after school. It was a very minor thing, but this small kindness became a core childhood memory. Story 27. When I was a waiter, if you ran off without paying, it came out of the waiter's pay. Only happened a couple of times, and both times the owners did the right thing and paid me out for it. Answer. When I was a waiter, if you ran off without paying, it came out of the waiter's pay. I guess I'm misunderstanding here, but it sounds like you're saying that if a customer failed to pay, the waiter covered the tab out of their own pay. If that's the case, how the ever-loving hell is that even remotely legal? I'm quitting on the spot. Level scummy behavior on the part of management. Story 28. I have had to have a friend pay for my meal occasionally, and I get them next time. Once I ordered at Subway, and when it came time to pay, I realized I had forgotten my wallet. I lived in a small town, so I just ran home and got it, and was able to pay. NBD. They knew me and where I lived. LOL. Story 29. Other side of this, there's a Mexican restaurant I frequent. Like these people know my order when they see me. I once genuinely forgot my wallet after a long day, and the bartender suspended my order after I found out they couldn't do Apple Pay. He said, "Don't worry about, they know me," etc. Next day, I showed up the minute they opened and made the bill right with a 50 tip. Story 30. My tipsy jerk lost my wallet and didn't realize until after ordering shawarma. I said, "Oh dang, my bad, I lost my money." Dude was like, "Nah, the order's already in, just take it, but promise to come back, not to repay, just to have more food." I went there for 10 years after that, and the food was consistently fire. Never forgot my wallet again. I swear they made me a customer for life just by letting a tipsy lady eat shawarma at 1 a.m. lol. Story 31. At Waffle House, you can earn your meal in the parking lot fight club, or you can just fight your server, but be careful, they don't mess around. Story 32. Not an employee, but ate at a small local sub shop outside Boston once. Didn't realize it was cash or check only and no card, and didn't have any cash on me. I offered to walk back to my place and grab a check, but they said to not worry about it and pay later. Went back there a few weeks to eat again and paid for the other sandwich. The guy had forgotten about it, but I didn't want to not pay for the other meal. Story 33. I had the opposite happen. The waiter walked out on me. We were at a cheap Italian restaurant eating on the patio. We got there early, so one waiter was covering the entire patio. But after he served us our food and wine, a second waiter came on and covered our part of the patio. We finished and asked for the check. The waiter now covering us said that it wasn't his table. We said that the other waiter served us and could that waiter give us the bill. The original waiter also claimed that he wasn't our server. Finally, we got tired of waiting for people to figure it out, so we tried to recall the prices of what we ordered, added $25 to cover tip and tax, and left the cash on the table. Story 34. I've seen Dine and Dashers bounce on a 100 bill. License plate taken and cops called. No idea what happened. When I was a GM at a pizza place, sometimes kids or regulars might come in and be a little, so I'd adjust the specials to make it work. Depending on who it was, I might add a note on their account. If it was someone I'd never seen, or with a note indicating habitual, then I'd just tell them sorry, and the crew would eat it. In the sit-down restaurant, we'd get a manager, and it would depend on the manager as to what they do. Generally, it's trying to give some special or a discount to knock the price down. If they had absolutely no money, then they might take something of value as a deposit, or have one party member stay while the other went to get money. It was before smartphones were a thing, but phones and pages existed. Those were often the items. Story 35. My boyfriend and I walked out on a shisha bar one time. We both thought the other had paid at the start, so we walked out waving, "Thank you and good night," to confused faces. Went back the next day and they said, Don't worry about it, which was so nice. We felt so guilty. Story 36. I was in a not-so-great time of my life, and I went to Wendy's for lunch one day. When I dug into my purse for my card, it was gone. I apologized to the workers and took my purse to a table and turned it inside out, but it was nowhere to be found. I was so embarrassed, and it really was a last straw. I went back to the counter and apologized again, sobbing, and told them to cancel the order. It seemed like the whole crew gathered and said they paid for my order. Then I cried harder, LOL. Those people really restored my faith in humanity that day. I hope they all have wonderful lives. Story 37. Okay, this is going to take a bit. This all happened in 1988, so I was in jail for a short time for something minor, just a weekend stay. Anyways, I heard on the TV in the day room that the police had been called last night because someone was up in a tree with a fork. A fork? The next night I had a new guy in my cell, and it was the guy with the fork. So he tells me the rest of the story. So he went into this pizza pasta place intending to dine and dash. He was eating pizza and drinking and was getting pretty tipsy. The manager comes over and says they wouldn't serve him anymore, and he had to pay and leave. So Buddy jumps up and grabs the waitress and a fork off the table. I guess the knife was too far away to get. He holds the fork at the girl's neck and backs out of the restaurant. Once outside, he lets the girl go and starts running up the road. The manager is running next to the guy and tells him that he, the manager, ran marathons on the weekend and Buddy wasn't going to get away. So Buddy decides to climb a tree to get away from the manager. He still has the fork and is threatening the manager with it. The cops come and surround the tree and tell Buddy to come down and drop the fork. Buddy says, "Fudge you. Go ahead and shoot me. BTW, this is in Canada, so the cops don't shoot him." Finally, he gets tired of hanging from the tree and comes down. They put him in remand for the rest of the weekend, which is where I got the story from him. Story 38. Couple years ago, I was working as a waiter at a sushi restaurant. Occasionally, we had company conference at the hotel across the street, and we would get flooded with people at lunch and dinner. One night, a group of 5 to 6 people attending a conference in town came over to dine. They ordered like 300 worth of food, and I was the only one waiting their table. They were nice and very professional. Then, I took my eyes off for 1 minute and they left without paying. I took the bill and ran over to the hotel lobby and hope I could catch one of them, but it was in vain. None of the hotel staff know who I was trying to find. I didn't even have a name. I was so afraid of having to pay the bill out of my own pocket. I was still in college, and it's worth like 3 shifts of work. I came back to the restaurant, stood by their table, and just stared into space. The other customers asked me what's wrong, and I told them a group left without paying, and I'd go what to do. The owner kept the bill open and didn't make me pay for it. Turns out the customer that asked me what's wrong found one of the guys at that table. Next day, he came over to pay and apologized. He said there was some banter and the other group said they would pay for his group, so they left. I got a big tip in the end. Story 39. I was working a job out of state with 5 or so guys. We went to lunch at this nice deli. They were having trouble with the register, so they told us to pay before we left. We went outside and ate, shot the breeze a while, and then left. I was thinking that night and didn't remember paying. Hit up the guys on the group chat. Did we forget to pay today? So the next day we went back to the same place for lunch and they had forgotten also. So we all just ordered the same thing as the day before and paid twice. They seemed shocked we had come back. They loaded us up on our sandwiches and gave us free cookies. Story 40. One of my coworkers had a couple who literally ran out on a busy night, and my coworker ran after them and tried to knock on their car window, but they just drove off and almost ran her over. The table was only like $71, and the owner knew it wasn't her fault after watching the cameras and just let her void the check. And she proceeded to blast their photos all over local Facebook groups. It was a fairly small town, and someone told us they were at the Airbnb next to her house. We called the cops and they got arrested and fined like $500 each. So always pay your tabs because they might come after you. Story 41. Back when I was a barista, there was plenty of flexibility. If you were apologetic, I'd absolutely comp your order. If you were rude, sorry, policy requires payment. I had one gentleman come through the drive-thru and showed me his phone died, so he couldn't use the app gift card to pay for his drink. He wasn't necessarily rude, but shrugged and expected me to do something about it. Nope, I'm not taking responsibility for your dead phone. That's on you. He didn't want to use another method of payment, so I gave him the free cup of water he ordered and maintained eye contact while dumping his drink in the sink. For anyone else, I would have absolutely handed them their entire order and just voided it in the computer, applied a discount to make it free. At least apologize and ask if you can pay next time. And then I'd tell you not to worry about it. It's on us this time. But expecting a free drink, I won't entertain that. Story 42. I worked back of the house when I worked restaurants, but when I delivered pizzas, I had a few times I'd get to a house and the customer wasn't fully aware of the total cost of the order and would start panicking. It happened with a few stressed parents, different orders and addresses, and an elderly caretaker. And each time I told them, don't worry about it, and to keep their money, I'll cover it. I was by no means in a stable financial situation, but in that moment, I had the funds to pay it forward. You never know what someone is going through and how much something trivial to you can mean to them. Story 43. I worked at a diner in college. My pay was 5 hour. I often worked the mid-afternoon shift, so if I was lucky, I would go home with 40, including my salary. One afternoon, the diner was empty. I was replacing the ice in the pop machine, filling some salt shakers, chatting with the line cooks. Typical. A woman comes in, clearly disheveled, shaken. She orders the cheapest thing on the menu, a grilled cheese or tuna sandwich, maybe a pop. Time comes to pay the bill and she's hunting through her purse, swears she had a 20 on her. She said, I must have left my card at home. Can I leave you my license as collateral? I said, please, it's on me. As someone who was making 5 cinchers, and I felt bad for her, I knew I was lucky. Worst part is, that comes out of my check, not the restaurant's. So I worked 2.5 hours for free to make sure she could eat, and I'm still proud of that, to this day. Story 44. I was about 16, working at a Subway in the downtown area of my town, and a business-looking man didn't have his wallet at checkout. He made a big to-do about it, and I said, don't worry, I'll cover it, and pulled out my own wallet and paid for his meal. He was incredibly embarrassed, as he should be, and said he would be back the next day to pay me back. I was not expecting it, but he did come back and gave me extra for the trouble. Story 45. Can't believe no one has made a joke about getting a summons to the food court yet. Anyway, I forgot my wallet at home on a day trip to a nearby city, 2.5 hours away. Had never been there in my life. Didn't realize I didn't have my wallet for the entire drive. No license, no cards, no cash. Was visiting an out-of-town project I was managing. Lunch tab was about 45. Felt horrible and was mortified. Asked the server to bring the manager over. Handed them my business card, explained what happened. Said I'd return next week, take care of my bill. Same day of the week the following week. Handed the manager a 50 and the server a 50 and apologized profusely. Place became my go-to lunch spot when visiting that project for the next year. When I paid the manager, he asked if I wanted my business card back. I explained that I didn't need it, but he could pin it on the wall for a good story. And he actually did, in his office, not where the public could see my contact info. Story 46. I accidentally walked out on a bar tab at a bar I went to somewhat regularly, but the bartender was new and didn't know me. Went back the next day to pay when I realized what I had done. The manager told me that they stopped the bartender from calling the police because they knew I would make it right. I gave the bartender a 100 tip as an apology. Edit. I gave the tip to the manager, not the bartender that wanted to call the police on a 50 tab. Story 47. I used to be a delivery driver. One time I had a delivery to a stripper. I get to the club. The bouncer lets me through. The stripper gives me cash and I leave. It was only after I got back to my car that I realized that she shorted me by like $5. I laughed it off. I was too distracted by all the titties. Story 48. I was once on the other side. I had dinner at a restaurant and couldn't pay. Not because I didn't have money, but for some reason that day my bank app and card didn't work. So I couldn't pay. The owner just gave me the restaurant account details and asked me to make a transfer later. I was shocked, but quite elated and made sure to send it in later. Story 49. I went into a little restaurant in upstate SC about 5 years ago and had a burger, fries, and sweet tea. Went to pay and they didn't take cards. They gave me their address and said, send the tip. You bet I sent it. 100 tip. Story 50. To be 100 honest, a customer ate and left without us noticing the other day. She came back and paid, saying she had forgotten to and apologizing. If she hadn't, nobody would have noticed, but we're a small restaurant and would have needed the money. Story 51. I took a couple of friends out for dinner one night. We were celebrating and I was paying. We went somewhere nice and it was not cheap. The bill comes, I get my wallet and find it empty. No driver's license, no cash, no credit cards, nothing. Completely empty. Once I finished panicking, I spoke with the manager. He let us leave with nothing more than my signature, promising to come back with cash. Got home, yelled at my husband. Was not his fault. He was just handy. Took his card to the ATM and ended up tipping 50 on a 100 bill. This was some years ago. Later discovered my coworker had helped himself to my wallet as a prank. Story 52. I've had a few occasions that were 150, and it was during a time, 2009 to 2015-ish, when the server was expected to pay out of pocket. This meant that I would walk with basically nothing at the end of the night for a full 10 hours of work. One time a guy tried to walk out on the bartender, so I went after him out the door to tell him to pay his tab. Dude was crazy. He saluted in the middle of the empty street while I was talking to him, quickly walked back towards me to the door, and poked me with his keys in my back. I don't remember if he paid. Turns out it was a single youngling draft, and when I lifted my shirt, I quickly realized he didn't poke me with keys. It was a small Swiss Army knife that he hit me with. It was not even close to a serious injury, but still. The cops were called, and the investigator called me a few days later, pleading with me to not press charges, given that he was a vet with PTSD. Having served, I understood in a way, and there was no real damage done, so I let it go. My boss asked, why are servers chasing after people not paying for tabs like that? Well, dude, 'cause you make us pay it, and I didn't know how big or small the tab was until later. I now own a restaurant and am well aware that the practice of making your employees pay for walkouts is both illegal and a recipe for disaster, especially in certain edge cases. We always get a card on file, physically or in the POS, unless it's irregular to a degree that we know where they live. It sucks, but the employer has to eat it and implement better safeguards. Securing payment channels should be on the employer and dummy-proof on the employee side. No one should have to come to a job that demanding for long hours through the night and then roll the dice on whether or not they make a living. Story 53. My manager did the coolest thing last week in this situation. My table's card was expired, so they tried 2 different cards with me, and they both came back declined. They spent 30 minutes after getting the check figuring out a card to use. They only had the cards on their phone, or how to get the money into their accounts. I told my manager, I don't think they're going to walk out because they've been spending 30 minutes trying to figure this out, and she went over and offered to cover their bill. She just said things happen and call it good karma. And my manager gave me what would have been 20 of the check in cash, so I didn't lose out on a tip for her generosity. She's never done that before, so it's not a regular thing. The check was $35 for 2 of them. Story 54. I volunteered at a bookstore. A young woman had a pile of books and had forgotten her wallet. Asked us to hold them for her, and she'd come back the next day to pay for and pick them up. An older customer asked, how much for all those books? Around 25, she said. They chatted for a bit, and he said he'd pay for it. Turns out he was a professor and just loved young people who read. Story 55. Not an employee, but there was a time when I tried to treat a couple of, now ex-friends out to dinner, but told them I was extremely limited on cash. One friend understood and ordered light while the other ordered something more pricey and mentioned they'd help if needed. When it actually came time to pay, said friend dipped out and went home to avoid helping while I was left struggling. The waitress who served us eventually told me not to worry about the rest of the change, that she would use some of her tip money, and we mentioned to the manager what happened. The next time I went back, I had given her back the money she used to help pay my bill and thanked her sincerely. Story 56. Wasn't a restaurant, but a grocery store. I watched the self-service checkout, and one evening some teen girls came in to buy some really basic stuff. Bread, jam, a frozen pizza, and a carton of orange juice. Well, the card they have wasn't working, so they sat to the side to call someone to figure it out. I just walked over and paid the 20. They were really embarrassed and shocked that I would pay, but very thankful. Story 57. Not a restaurant, but my dad used to manage a petrol station. In South Africa, the petrol attendant pumps your petrol for you, and you generally pay after they pump the petrol diesel. There were many times where people couldn't pay or forgot wallets or whatever, and this was like 0506, so no cards on your phone, etc. And so people would pay with sunglasses, watches, not crazy valuable, basically anything of value in the car, or on more than one occasion, a digital camera. Most times the people would come back the next day and pay the bill and get their things back, but half the time they didn't bother, or they weren't from the town. So my dad paid the petrol difference and kept the items. This is how we got our first family camera. Story 58. I delivered pizza for a number of years, and one of the local town tipsy came in and said, "I'd like to order a pizza for delivery." And me. He said his wallet was at his house, so I asked who wanted to take him and the risk of getting stiffed. One of my friends, built like a linebacker, agreed to take him. When they got there, the tipsy said, "I'll take the pizza in and grab my wallet." My friend said no way and that he should get the wallet first. The tipsy pauses for a moment, then says, "I'll fight you for it." My friend agrees. The guy screams no and sprints into his house, pizzaless. So in answer to your question, nothing happened, and we ate his pizza that night. Story 59. I was getting Qdoba in college and realized I left my wallet in a computer lab, which was mortifying. The checkout guy said, "It's fine, you can keep the burrito." And I was so surprised and thankful that after I got my wallet, I went back, like a 15-minute bus ride, and paid for it, and tried to give him a tip for being nice. But he just had me put it in the tip jar. I was so hungry and stressed. That guy did a small thing to make my night a little less stressful. Thanks, Qdoba guy. Story 60. We had an older gentleman come in late one night. We knew something was up when arrived as he had a head wound that appeared to still be fresh, and he denied any form of assistance with it. He also sent back 3 different kinds of service bread to begin his meal. At the end, he claimed he had no way to pay and claimed he had informed us of this when he sat down. He, of course, did not. We tried briefly to reason with him, but eventually called the non-emergency line as he had run up a 400 tab. They informed us it was, in fact, an emergency, and we dialed 911 and had police on the scene in about 20 minutes. They spoke with the man for a few minutes until a social worker arrived, as it was clear the man was in crisis. They convinced him to leave the restaurant in an ambulance, and we did a house comp, which means we essentially ate the cost of his check. Story 61. Once delivered pizza to a row house in a bad neighborhood to a woman clearly strung out, bouncing around the place and a baby lying on the floor crying. Barely any furniture in the house was cold. She was so skinny and malnourished, I felt so bad for her and the child. This was clearly a stash house. She tried to pay with a check. We didn't take checks, and then asked how to spell 11. I stepped outside and called my boss and said this one is on the house. Left the food, took the check and bounced. Got back to the shop and explained the situation. Boss understood and ripped up the check. Sometimes 50 just ain't worth it. Story 62. I don't work in the restaurant industry, but do work in hospitality. We had a client walk out on a $5,000 charge. She merely called her credit card company and said, "We never provide the service." The company canceled the charge and ain't shoot we can do about it. We have text messages and video 100 proving we provided the service, but company is not interested in our side of the story. Story 63. I had used some 50 bills that were apparently counterfeit at a Burger King drive-thru, and later at a Pizza Hut when I got it delivered. About 2 hours after the Pizza Hut delivery, the cops came knocking on my door, asking me questions for like 10 minutes before leaving. About a week later, 2 cops showed up and said I was under arrest for using counterfeit money. They dragged me off to jail for the day. After being fingerprinted, photoed, and dragged around the police station for about an hour, I then got to spend 12 hours sitting in a cold, wet, sticky cement jail cell, while several people a few cells over switched off between crying, screaming, and beating their head off the wall. At one point, a janitor came in to hose down the blood out of a cell from the guy who was screaming, vomiting, and beating his various body parts bloody on the cement in his cell across from me, while 2 women screamed and yelled, fighting with each other in 2 separate but on-looking cells. Eventually, they dragged me in front of a judge and told me to come back in a month for my court date. Then they walked me outside and left me on the front steps of the courthouse in nothing but my sandals, sweatpants, and a t-shirt in the middle of December. I had no wallet, no phone, nothing. No way to get home. On my court date, I was charged with fraud because I used it at 2 places. They didn't care that I didn't know they weren't fake bills, just that I had used them. The day I was arrested, I missed a job interview and a doctor's appointment that was 8 months in the making because of it. I now have a criminal record, and it's prevented me from getting a lot of jobs I would have otherwise had. So to quote a song that is truly timeless, fudge da police. Story 64. This was like 1985, and Jambalayas on Burnett was the fanciest place I'd ever taken a date. We were 19. My card got declined. The server and manager were both super cool. I told them I'd bring by the next day. I did, and that was our fancy place until it closed. We are still married. Story 65. I was a cashier at a Panda Express type place. The customer used a fake 5 mixed into the 1 bills he paid with. My red flag signal was going off at the touch of the bill, but there was a long line and people waiting, so I let it go thinking, it's probably dirty or something. Turns out it was fake. I did tell the manager and he let it go. It's taped up as a reference for counterfeit now. My first counterfeit encounter. Story 66. I work fast food. My coworker took the order, and when they got to me, they said they forgot their money. Normally, they tell us to either go or go hoke to get their wallet and come back. This lady still wanted her coffee. I told her she had to pay. Called me a name, then left. She came back 10 minutes later, meanie about what I did to the order taker. We normally just give the food and collect the money later for our good regulars. She was neither. But it was a small town, so my coworker, over the speaker, called her out by name, told her to stop her crap and complaining and to go to Wendy's or anywhere else, since we won't be serving her today. Story 67. I used to eat Brahms daily in high school. It was my autistic safe meal. Double bacon cheeseburger, nothing else. I didn't have money once and they told me I could just pay it next time I came in because they knew it'd come back. I did come back and I did pay. I miss Brahms. Story 68. There was a 12 top. 8 were high school kids. They ate like they were dying of starvation, and then the kids left. Then, one of the adults left. So there were 3 adults left who said they weren't paying all the bills, that they had 1 kid there for dinner, but the others were their kids' friends. They weren't going to pay. Our manager said, call them back, they need to pay. And they again said, we don't know them. And our manager said, well, your kid knows them. So you'd better get them all back to pay the bills or we are calling the police. The bills in total were something around 600 or 700. The 3 adults that were left ended up splitting it all. Absolutely wild. Story 69. I used to manage a pizza store. Sometimes when I rang up a customer's card, they wouldn't have enough on it to pay. I always just accepted what they had and never told them the difference because I know a lot of them were struggling with money. We also had a community special where anyone could come in and ask for a large cheese and they'd get one for free. No questions asked. When the pizza business was sold to a new owner, that was the one request I made, for the new owner-manager to keep the community special going. I really hope they still are. One of my favorite things about the pizza place was feeding people. I miss it every day. Story 70. Things have changed, but older employees will tell you that back in the day you paid walkouts out of your own pocket. I'm talking 90s and early 2000s. Things have changed for the better, and today that is completely unacceptable. Story 71. Long time ago, most German restaurants didn't accept credit cards. I was marketing manager and took about 18 staff and customers to dinner. I showed my deck of credit cards. No go. I showed them my ID and promised to come back the next day and pay. They trusted me. Well, my company was one of the largest employers in the area. Story 72. I've been on the other side twice. Once I ate a full breakfast and coffee at my regular place and couldn't pay for some reason to do with my card. I was open with them and said I'd come back that morning to fix it, and they were fine with it. The other time, I and a friend had a coffee each and thought we'd paid. We left and didn't realize until hours later that we didn't pay when ordering. I rang the cafe and they politely didn't care. Story 73. Years ago, I used to work the kitchen at a bar called Chilkoot Charlie's. One night, some douche reached over the counter and grabbed a whole meal. And when I turned around and noticed what he'd done, he laughed in my face and asked what I was going to do about it, while gesturing to his 2 or 3 buddies. There are 2 things I don't think he counted on. 1, the bouncers at Coots in those days did not fudge around. 2, I fed the bouncers for free. He got bounced out that night and was given the choice to either pay up, including a tip, or his getting bounced would be a permanent 86. He paid willingly and his buddies were pissed that he had gotten them all kicked out. Never saw him again. Story 74. 2 years ago, had a guy that was coming in regularly for the past couple months run up a $350 tab one night, and he refused to pay. Called the cops. He was jerked to the cops and spit on one. He was arrested. He was in the police car. I had to go tell him he was banned in front of the cops, and he tried begging to pay the tab. Never heard what happened, but never saw him again. Story 75. When I was a kid, my dad and I would go out to a local restaurant for soup or ice cream, depending on the weather. Once he forgot his wallet at home and offered to leave me there for collateral while he drove home to get his wallet. The cashier didn't bother to hold back their laughter and said they knew us and trusted him. My dad had been going there for about 20 years at that point, and I had been coming since I was born, so it wasn't a surprise. but my dad was super embarrassed and I guess didn't know what else to offer to do. We went home, he paid the bill in full, and knowing my dad, he tipped the cashier a ridiculous amount. Story 76. I ran into more I forgot to tips than I forgot to pay the bills. Annoying either way, but manager would comp it because most of the people didn't pay because they couldn't afford it. I would still have to tip out on it though, so the server gets screwed either way. People don't realize this. I'd rather you at least tip me and not pay the bill even if it's only a few bucks. Don't get caught intentionally dining and dashing though. Story 77. I had someone leave cash on the table and leave. Super common. It was a very busy restaurant. His bill was something over 50, like 58 maybe. I went to collect my book and there was a 20 and whatever else the amount was. But he left his phone on the table, LOL. So this guy calls the restaurant all angry, and I'm so happy I was the one that answered. He literally had an attitude about did we let his phone get stolen? Blah, blah. It felt so good to say, sir, I have your phone, and when you come back to collect it, you can settle the rest of your bill. Claims he gave me a 50. I told him it was a 20. Of course, that means I didn't get a tip. So when he came back to collect it, he must have felt really bad or been really grateful. So he gave me 60 for the bill and told me to keep the rest. I ended up with a pretty nice tip from that. Story 78. We used to have these two dudes come in. They'd be in every night for weeks and we wouldn't see them for a month and they'd be back. They work for the power company. One time they came in and realized they left the RIT credit card at the hotel and they only had enough cash to taxi back to the hotel. The waitress told them she'd cover their bill and they promised they'd be back the next day. They'd order a couple burgers and beers, so she used her tips from that night to pay. They came in the next night and it was her night off. The owner happened to be in, and for some reason he got pissed off that the waitress covered their bill. He called her up and fired her. Mind you, he got paid for their order. I felt so bad for her because she was helping out regular good customers of ours. Another time, we had a couple of kids in, and they were so polite and literally counting change before they ordered to make sure they'd have enough to leave a tip. We may have messed up an order of fries and gave them free soda because all they could afford was 2 side salads and water. They were the nicest kids, so it was worth it. Story 79. I had a large party that had left cash and left, but not enough to pay their bill. My manager tried chasing them in the parking lot when I ran and told him, but they peeled off. It was probably 50-ish short, but he voided 100 or more off the tab so that I would have a tip. I have never seen a server have to cover it out of pocket. That's just wrong. Once at Hooters, they did call the police when someone walked out on a large bar tab, but the waitress wasn't punished or anything. Not tipping is really messed up though, because we have to tip out a bot of total sales to bussers, dishwashers, and bartenders. We actually lose money. Story 80. I once ordered 4 avocado and cucumber rolls from a sushi restaurant when I was 18. I was newly vegetarian and getting into veggie sushi, and avocado cucumber rolls were very cheap around me. I ordered from a nice restaurant, and I was used to getting small 8-piece avocado rolls. When I came to pick up the order, it was like 60, and the rolls were huge. Avocado on the top and bottom. I was flabbergasted when he told me my total. I was a frightened teen, and I told him in a scared voice that I only had 20, and I had no idea they would be that big and expensive. He seemed to not know what to do, but after almost 30 seconds of looking at my sad face, he told me, it's okay, give me the 20. I started thanking him in awe, and it took me a few seconds to realize that he wanted me to leave and stop thanking him because he could get in trouble for his kindness. I'll always remember that. The sushi was also delicious. Story 81. Customer here, but my coworker once walked on a 5-figure bar tab. Our company got bought out, and the new owner's rules barred paying for adult beverage. So what they did for parties was a bit weird. They'd pay in full for the venue and the food and the non-alcoholic drinks, but run a cash bar. But not really. The first quarter under the new no adult beverage rule, one of the sales weasels, the one that got the biggest bonus, stepped up and paid everyone's tab. After that, whichever sales weasel was getting the biggest bonus had it inflated specifically to cover the tab at that quarter's party. Anyway, the winning weasel goes to pay at like midnight, and his Amex is declined with an error for something like $15K. So was his wife's. They make some calls. The cards are fine. They try again. Nada. It's been like a half hour. Everyone else is long gone. No one is answering their cell phone, and he's only got the 1 card and 300 cash. The manager finally makes the decision to call the owner and ask what he wants to happen. Well, turns out the owner had made changes with their payment processor the week before, dropped Amex, and then didn't tell anyone. So they let him walk and he came back in the morning with cash. Story 82. This once happened to me when I was a kid with my dad. My dad and I went for shopping and later went to a restaurant to have a dinner. My dad forgot his wallet in the clothes shop and also his. He left me as collateral in the restaurant and went back to the shop and got his wallet to pay back the money. I didn't know I was left as collateral in the restaurant. I just sat there happily enjoying my dessert. Only when I went back home, my dad told me about this. It's not the last time it happened. My parents are clumsy with their wallets phones. They lost so many of their phones because they forgot somewhere. Once my father bought me to an amusement park. He thought he brought 200 bills, but turns out it was 20 Rs bills. He luckily saw his friend nearby and borrowed some money, while once again left me as collateral. Story 83. Once in a club I worked at, a man spent around $2,000 on champagne that he mostly intentionally spilled on the floor. He was with a date and left for a cigarette. He never came back, and the girl was still waiting for him. The bouncers started to run in the streets to find him, while another one and the manager were bullying the girl to pay the bill. They somehow found out she was doing the bar exam soon and pressured her into paying by talking about how she would lose her career if she got a criminal record. The guy was never found. The girl paid while crying. A really sad night. In other places with less intense situation, it's kind of a no biggie. I'll take your phone number and hopefully you come back one day. Story 84. My father once walked out of a restaurant with my mom in a city on vacation. Funnily enough, in the country he grew up in. Forgot to pay and just continued on with the trip until he remembered days after and no longer in the same city. When he went back to the city on a later vacation, again, he is originally from that country and went back again to visit family. He went back to the restaurant to pay the bill, only for the staff to look at him like he was crazy. Story 85. Several years back, I was bartending, and a guest gave me their card for the running tab. He was sitting at the bar the whole time, and our POS didn't have the option to swipe and pre-authorize the card, so we just keep them in a cup with an updated receipt. The guy took 2 or 3 smoke breaks throughout his stay. On his last one, he never came back. After a bit, I went to take payment for his tab and realized he had left me one of those fake cards credit card companies send in the mail with credit card offers. I wasn't even mad, LOL. Ended up just getting check voided, and the whole staff learned a new walking out on a tab strategy to look out for. Story 86. So I work at a takeaway pizza place. One night this woman comes in to pick up an order, and her card keeps getting declined for some reason. She had enough money on the card, or at least said she did, but for whatever reason, the sale just wouldn't go through. She was extremely distressed at this and sat in the corner for a while texting someone while other customers came and went, then left to go grab some cash from an ATM. Came back a bit later after not finding one, basically in tears, and my boss just said to take the pizzas and come back tomorrow to pay. 20 minutes later, we got a call from the guy who'd placed this order. He started screaming that there was money on the card, and how dare we not accept it, and we were incompetent and didn't know how to handle business. My boss got the phone and tried to explain that the card kept getting declined for another reason, and that they could just come back the next day, but he wasn't having it. The yelling continued, and when we hung up the phone, he kept trying to call back. The next day, he left a horrible review, saying we'd verbally abused him, and clearly we deserved to go out of business. Was a pretty bad night. Story 87. Had a table I felt might walk out with the OL. We're gonna smoke a cigarette line. When they never returned, I reminded my manager that it was he who let them go outside when they told them that. That's it for this video. Don't forget to support Vancher and my second channel, Vanchus. See you soon.